Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jdaze Debrief, one of the first regattas of the season. So actually, since midwinters, I don't think there was any before this, and certainly seems to be a light summer. So we thought we'd put a little effort into this and do a good debrief so we could enjoy sailing. While we're here, just a reminder to join the class, renew your membership, and a lot of kind of good stuff. This is a shot from Lake Garda going downwind, beautiful place. And there's my contact information. I will, I'll show it at the end as well, but you guys all know how to find me, so it's all good. Today, we're gonna talk about a number of different subjects that we noticed from Jdaze this year. I had Roy, my son Roy Ingham, with me, and he flew a drone, and we got to talk about things as well. And he did a great job of editing some of this video and helping me get ready for this. So he's on here as well. With that, Roy will be doing any questions. He'll be monitoring the chat room and breaking in and asking me questions. So ask your questions through Roy, and I encourage questions and comments and anything else you have. So with that, we'll get going. Up in the upper right-hand corner of this is 20 seconds to go till the start. And everybody's a little rusty. And, what I noticed was that there was, 2 races. And with that, there were 5 starts. 3 were recalls, I think, something like that. And of the 5, there was 1 where people were reasonably on the line. In this one, you could see they were pretty far over. And we'll show that again here. And another one, we're not going to show it, but we're pretty far back. And so I think my lesson here is that you can see everybody's reaching down the line right here because everybody's early. 15 seconds to go. So look at go though. Wait, so right at go, if you drew a line from the committee down, like most of the boats are over. There's 1 straggler back here that's not, maybe these 2 at the pin, or the winter one's awful close. But, between the SAGs and the OCSs, I think making sure you know where the line is, getting lots of line sights, doing some practice runs to the starts, all that kind of thing, I think would be really good low-hanging fruit to improvement. So this is Chris Stone and team in Velocidad, and I wanted to show this video because this was before the first race, and they comfortably won the first race. And pretty much no matter where I stop it here, the tiller is in the center of the boat. So I wanted to show you a couple techniques I like about this. So if I keep the video going, we'll play it again a few times. And now look when Ted, the trimmer, Ted Whittigee, goes down below to go check out the jib. Now this is just before the race, so they wouldn't race like this. They would probably balance him out if he needed to go to leeward. But look when he goes there and he heels the boat a little bit, boat heads up right away because of the extra helm there. It actually forced Chris to steer a little there. And I think that's not a good thing. It's just a reminder that weight is really, really sensitive. But let me go back in this and play that again. And there's another thing I really like. He's frying pancakes. So you can see his hands on the deck there. And it's, I like that right here. He's got his tiller on the deck with his hand right over the ball, and he's kind of dragging the ball across the deck to kind of dampen the movements. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And so I think that sort of helps him steer really, really smoothly without oversteering. The steering, the movements are just super slight. Let me just kind of show that again. Now we can watch the whole thing, how little tiny steering movements go. And then as soon as Ted goes to leeward, he kind of buggers them up. So it's kind of a reminder everybody to be really soft on the rail, keep the boat at a really constant heel. So talking about flat, there's sort of a range of what flat really is. So this, I think, is the second race, and it got a little lighter. And it was interesting, Kirk Reynolds, who won this race, is the boat to leeward here. And see how flat they're sailing? It's almost, pretty close to dead vertical. And I think that's really good and really light air. It should feel, with a little bit more breeze, I like the neutral helm like we had before. But once it gets really, really, really flat and really light, I think you want to be almost vertical. See how vertical this is to, if you look at, compared to the horizon, that's almost completely vertical. And Chris Stone is the boat to weather a little bit, and he's got just a little bit of heel. It's not much, but it's definitely notable. And I think, somewhere in the range between where Kirk is and where Chris is the right range. But certainly when it's flat water and really light, we tend to sail sort of, we always call it uncomfortably flat. But what I mean by that is it's nice to have a neutral helm like Chris had before in the video before, but once you get really, really flat and light air, you end up pushing on the helm a little bit. It doesn't feel good, but it is fast. It's super efficient, especially in height. So at this point too, I'm going to continue on, but I would like to encourage any questions or comments. Anything in the chat yet? Roy?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet? Okay. So this next shot is sailing upwind, and this is also before that first race, so I could get nice and close. And what I was looking at was the leech telltales on both the main and jib. And what I'm looking for is a certain percentage of flow on the main, and I'd like to get the jib leech telltale flowing. So as we play this, I'm going to stop it a few times, and we can kind of look at what the telltales are doing. So you can see up top here, I'll annotate that as well. If you look up top, this leech telltale on the main is completely folded over on the main. And I think that you got to be really careful not to over trim. It is flat water, but it's pretty light. And so what I'm looking for is probably 50% flow, or maybe 40% if I'm feeling really good. And I call this more like maybe 20%. Now, I think this was before the race and they were just warming up, and they did win the race pretty comfortably. So they definitely did it right for the race, but I think right before the race, they're a little bit over trimmed. So we'll continue on and we'll look at the jib leech telltale, who's also in here. So it's a little hard to see, and the reason it's hard to see is it's not streaming. And I always have a little bit of, I'm always looking for a little bit streaming here. Here it is. I'll play it a little bit so you can kind of see it again. So it really wasn't flowing there. And so let me get rid of that annotation. So I'm always wondering when we're always trimming to a certain distance off of that spreader on the Genoa. And I'm always afraid that when the leech telltale starts to stall, that it's over trimmed. So if you have to let it out too much, it doesn't work either. But I think you got to be really careful that you don't over trim that Genoa. So I think the bottom line with all of this is that, to me, in this, until you're overpowered, you're really paying attention to the leech telltales on both sails, particularly the main. I want some percentage of flow. 50% is a really good starting point. When you feel really good, you can stall it even more than that. If you're accelerating or you have lots of waves or anything like that, then it's less. wanted to show this one because we talk an awful lot about forestay sag. And I wanted to give a different view of the forestay sag and look at it from the front, from a drone. So this is Brad Braden's boat and team, Scott and Greg and all those guys. And let me get hone right to where the forestay sag. What I like to do is line up the bottom of the Genoa to the mast. And you can see that there's sag here. I'll draw a couple lines on it to really show it. And so if I draw the mast right there, you can see that the forestay sag is probably right from there to there. That's significant. It's a little hard to tell because it's, you know, similar color to the mast with the sun reflecting off it. But that gap is, you know, well more than a mast width. It's probably 2 mast widths. So that's probably 5 or 6 inches of forestay sag, which I would say is about right for this condition. You want some power. If you sag it too much, it's flat water. You don't want a ton. But even if it was choppier, I think if you have too much forestay sag, then if it's too much forestay sag, then it starts to bounce around in the waves. So that's not a good thing either. If I was going to critique one thing on here, I think that the you know, the Genoa halyard is too tight. I would like to see some more scallops in there. I'm going to go let this play through. It's only a few seconds, but kind of interesting view of the jib and the slot. So right there is the slot. We don't usually get to see it from this angle, usually looking from behind. I think what I noticed when I looked at this is it seems wider when you look at it from this area. Right up the spreader, it seems like a lot of distance. And when you're looking at it from behind, I think because the main's in the way, it doesn't look as big, the slot there. So I thought that was interesting. Not sure what to do with that information, but thought it was interesting. This is a little further on in the lake, and wanted to talk a little bit about boat handling here. This is a nice tack. I like the way the mechanics went. I'm going to play it through, and then I'll play it through again, and I'll talk about a couple things that might have Brad do a little different next time. So I like his steering rate was nice and smooth. Genoa trim came right in. Main was eased, trav up. He's on his course right away. I think that's all really good stuff. So that was a well done tack. But if I was going to be picky, I would, let's go through this again. And look how when they start to move, like right here, they start, I see Greg there, starting to move, getting ready to tack. And they start shuffling around a lot. Like they start moving really a lot here. Brad's moving, and they still haven't turned yet. And you can see they've actually turned the wrong way for a moment while they're getting ready. There's really no reason to move a muscle until you start the turn. So let's go back there and take a look at that again. Actually, I'll go a little further back. So they're all moving around, and then they start to turn, and they don't need to do that. So I like to see a really quiet boat. Nobody moves anything. You don't want to disturb the flow. You don't want to, you know, as a driver, I don't want to be steering all over the place or anything. And what I like to see instead is just a really quiet boat. And then as soon as the boat starts to turn, that's when people go into action. And so the first thing that anybody does on our boat when we tack is I start, if I'm driving, I start pushing the tiller. And that's the beginning of anybody moving. And by the way, that holds for heavy wind too. If you go a little bit slow going into the tack, because people start coming off the rail early, you go a little slower into the tack, and that makes the tack slower, makes it harder, and all that stuff. One other really minor thing I would like to do is, I think in this wind, you can give the boat a roll. And if I was going to roll this boat, I would probably count it down. So I'd say tacking in 3, 2, 1, tacking, and I might even call the roll. So here we are, we start the tack, and I'd say roll in 3, 2, 1, roll, right about when the Genoa's kind of head to wind. is a good time to roll. So maybe just a little bit of roll that would help to do. But overall, a pretty good tack, Brad. So you did a lot of things right. This is Chris Stone leading the first race, and they did a really nice light air set. The offset's just a little high. And so I wanted to kind of point out, I'll play it through once, and I want to point out a couple things that I really like of what they did. So playing that again, the offset's a little tight. So what they do is they still trim the jib out. So Ted gets that jib out. And so and Chris gets the main out and twists the main. So they're sailing fast on the offset. So Ted and Chris Stone are sailing really fast. They're getting the sails trimmed correctly, the heel's correct. They're still racing on this offset, which I think a lot of people don't. So I like that. The pole's forward because this is going to be set pretty tight. It's too tight to set on the offset here. And it's also setting, you know, it's not very windy, so you know you're going to be pretty high anyway. So they start the pre-feed, but they don't go too far. Like, I don't like it when, so Mike Marshall, there's the tactician. He's got the guy in his hand. He hasn't even barely started going yet. So they're going to wait until the hoist starts before they pulls the guy around. I think if you pull the guy around now, you really disturb the Genoa. And I know a lot of teams do that. So they're really patient. Chris is steering the leeward. I don't mind that, especially in lighter air. You can actually see the offset mark really well. It's a good spot. I think it's a good spot to sit. I don't like to sit down there normally, but for the offset, but if it's light enough, I do. And then I'll end up to leeward anyway downwind. So, and then notice that as soon as they call for the hoist, they're right near the offset. Bow person's hoisting. Mike's pulling, as tactician, is pulling the guy back. As soon as it hits the pole, he stops pulling. Just a little, get it, because you know that's the angle it's going to be. Ted grabs the sheet. And immediately the bow person, what I like what he does there, he holds on to the pole to keep it from coming back, separating from the chute. Has already uncleated the Genoa, holding the pole forward as he goes down to get the Genoa. And that allows getting the Genoa out of the way, allows the chute. Genoa's getting out of the way before it's even got a chance to fill yet, and that allows it to fill quicker. Chris has the main out. And they're on course and filled and trimmed really quickly. So a lot of really nice things about that set. It's a neat shot of them going downwind. I think it was an interesting wind speed. You know, if it was any windier, they could square back that pole and really go deep. And if it was any lighter, they would have to come up quite a bit and put the pole to the forestay to keep their VMG going. So they're kind of in that crossover between whether they're basically reaching downwind, we call it tacking downwind, going back and forth and kind of squaring back. And there's a couple of things that have to happen in that mode. And they're doing them pretty well here. So let's start with the Spinnaker. I'm basically trimming, Ted's basically trimming it for a very symmetric look. See, if you look how symmetric that Spinnaker looks, you'll see it from a different angle in a moment. As we kind of go overhead a little bit, right there. So, you know, the Spinnaker looks kind of the same from side to side, and that's what you're looking for, unless you're in the that reach mode, which they're not quite. So I think in this mode, the wind is kind of flowing from the top down on the Spinnaker instead of across it. So you don't want a ton of curl like you would if it was lighter. And so Ted's not over trim, is trimmed so there's just a little bit of curl every once in a while, but not curling too much. You want just a hint of curl every once in a while, but not too much. So another thing to look at in this is the main trim. A really good starting point for your main trim is, so the trimmer will be always trying to trim back the pole, and it'll be roughly perpendicular to the apparent wind. And that's how you know you're close. And you might try to square it back a little bit from there. A really good starting point for your main trim is the continuation of the of that Spinnaker pole. So if I drew a line here, if that's the Spinnaker pole, you know, it's out a little bit from the pole, but it's pretty close. And so what I typically do is I'll trim it to almost perpendicular, you know, parallel to the boom is parallel to the pole. And then I might let it out a little bit from there and see if it luffs at all, if it bubbles in the front of the main at all. If it doesn't, I'll keep letting it out till it bubbles, and I'll pull it back in. But a really good starting point is pretty much parallel. And you probably be parallel or a little bit eased from parallel seems just about right to me. The other thing that's good about this is the vang tension. So you can see that the leach of the main, you know, it's pretty light, so you don't want any vang at all. And you can see the leach of the main has a little bit of motion to it, even though there's hardly any waves, showing us that it's nice and loose. And you can see here that it's, you know, it's kind of nicely opened up top. A little bit of twists in the main from top to bottom. So that's a good look too. I like to switch gears here. I'm going to roll this back, but I have a little discussion here about dirty air and how much you can lose downwind. I mean, not downwind, upwind, and particularly in light air. So I'm going to play this through, and then we'll talk about it. Take a look at this fourth boat up from the pin. Reasonable start, back a little bit, but should be okay. But then they start to fall in some dirty air. And it's pretty dramatic how much they end up losing. So we fast forwarded here because it takes a little while. And at some point, they really fall into some dirt. And in light air, look how much they start falling back. And look at the angle even, like their wind is so disturbed that they've lost, you know, they were up here at the start and now they're down here. And eventually they tack out. So I'll play that again to kind of show how much they lose by being in dirt. So I think you'd lose less if it was a little windier out, but I think in this lighter stuff, it's already so light, you're below hull speed already. You lose some power and you lose another, you know, if you lose a half a knot and you're only going 2, you're 25% slower. That's pretty big. So I'm going to show something here along the way. So right here, they're kind of in the danger of being in dirty air, right? Like the wind, the backwind goes to weather just a little bit, but they don't lose it all right away. They slip in slowly, and then right about here, they get into a spot where they're in the dirty air of this third boat up from the back. And I kind of look at the dirty air coming off the back as probably going like this, you know, kind of like maybe this is the zone of dirty air. So I think that they're probably, let me get rid of that right there. So they're probably just starting to really fall into it right now. And you see, as soon as they start to fall in it, that's when the wheels fall off and they lose so much more. You lose a ton right there. So this next video, what we're going to show is we're going to show how some of the escape routes that they could have done. It's a different start. Once again, I'll play it through most of the way. But we have about, this kind of lasts almost all the way to almost ley line. I think in general, left was favored. So people were trying to get that way. But what you'll notice here is the first opportunity to escape is when you realize you're in trouble. So this is basically go right here. This is right at the start. And there now are two boats. So the first boat bails before the, oops, hang on, I gotta go back one. So the first boat starts to bail before the start gun. You'll see him go right, hang on. He realizes he's in trouble and he's tacking right there. And I think that's really smart. If you realize you're in trouble, so they're behind these other two boats. And I think within, 15 seconds, they're probably ahead. Shortly after the gun, they're free on going a little bit right. And then this boat to lure them does the exact same thing. So I think an early bail is really good. So if I was these boats here and all this dirt, I would have done the same. I probably would have bailed out if I was one of these two boats that was late in a lot of dirt. And you can see how much they lose by being in that dirt. So now we have an interesting scenario. So let's focus on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boats. So there's 7 boats that arguably, you'd call this more or less the front row. They were able to sail to the left. And even though some are a little further behind than others, I'd still kind of call this going the way you want to go, kind of the front row. So we're getting near ley line, and there's going to be a lot of choices. And I think if you're not one of the lead dogs, if you're not one of these top 3 or 4 here, you don't get to choose when you go. So you either have to go before the group or after the group. And I like that this boat just said, hey, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boats over here. If I don't go first, then I'm probably going to get tangled up in some mess. So they went first. Now everybody's going to start to go here. So this guy goes second. It's good. I think that was a reasonable move, and you're hoping you're not getting tacked on if you're that person. You sped up there a little bit. Then this boat went third, and once again, they're really hoping that one of these 2 other boats won't tack on them. But if you wait for the perfect lane, you're going to be overstood. So it's worth tacking now. And then if these two boats do tack on, you still have the choice potentially to do a clearing tack. These 2 boats go, and now that just leaves these last 2 boats. And there's an interesting choice the second boat from the right makes. They have a choice of either going, they could go right now and they'd be fine, or they could go right as this boat goes, or they could go past them, and it's really their choice. And they're getting pretty close to ley line. So if I was them, I'd be getting nervous and be ready to tack. And I think they waited a little too long here. Like they waited for that boat ahead to start to tack, and they went right here. But I want to go back to the dirty air thing we were talking about before, where the dirty air is. So if I think the dirty air goes about like, oops, let me erase that. So I think the dirty air goes from like, you know, kind of goes a little bit to weather and then sags down like that. And then it kind of goes down like this. So they actually, even though they tacked a little lighter than I would have liked to have seen, I think their bow is ahead of the dirt here. And I think you can tell if you're in dirt here by looking at your apparent wind. So if you look at your, you know, your apparent wind is basically where your masthead fly is coming from. It's probably coming from here. So all their sails are in front of the masthead fly. So if we fast forward, so this is a long port. So we sped it up here so you could see that they barely lose anything. So even though they tacked a little bit late, that was still a viable lane. And we kind of don't think of that always as a viable lane, right? You're below and to leeward of somebody. You think that's a terrible spot. And certainly it's not ideal, but it's not bad either. So they went all that way, all the way from the port ley line. Now they're almost at the starboard ley line. You know, they've gone halfway across, you know, halfway up the beat, and they've barely lost a thing. So I think that's a valid lane.
Jack to Peters next.
So the last thing I want to talk about here is a situation we had at a leeward mark. Now, before I do this, any questions so far?
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat. Okay. So we had an interesting room situation at the bottom mark, and certainly from our perspective, we couldn't tell exactly who was right and wrong. But it was interesting because we had two different vantage points. We had a drone in the sky, and Roy was flying a drone, and I was doing some video. So let's watch this video out, and we'll play it out. And you make your call on what you think. So I'm going to call people out here because we know who they are. So Dave Stoller is coming in there, and that's Jack DePeters on the outside. There's a lot of yelling. I think I might even heard the P word in there, the protest word. So let me back that up again so you can sort of see it from my perspective again. See Jack taking his Spinnaker down, heading to the mark.
Not sure what the room situation
Dave's pretty far back.
Right.
So another interesting perspective is, let's look at that from the sky now. There's Jack coming downwind on the right there. I think that's Kirk Reynolds that already got around. Dave's there on the left in the blue. Okay, so then we're going to play that again, except this time we're going to put in the 3 bow length zone. You'll see it in a second here. So it's a little bit off from the mark now because the mark will be in it right at the right moment. So Jack right now, so first of all, if you go back, you'll see that, let's see. The way we set this up was, so you could see that that's really a one boat length right there. We used Kirk Reynolds' boat as a guide. So when Jack jibes here, so right now, you know, I would say if I drew a line from Jack's transom, he's probably Dave's not overlap. But then Jack turns even more. And by the time he just hits the 3 boat lane zone, it sure looks like Dave's on the inside there. I can't tell about 537. It's a little harder for us to tell. Kind of seems like not. The 537 is still outside the zone, so Dave has room on 537. So I think we just pause it there, right? So then you see that, you know, you already guys know what happens when it unfolds. So what I wanted to talk about here was a couple things. You know, the onus in the rules is if you don't have an overlap, you have to, the boat that gains an overlap or breaks an overlap, so in this case, gains an overlap, has to show that they did so between the 3 boat lane zone. So if nothing else, I think 50-20 there was being very risky. Like they have to essentially prove it, and unless you happen to have a drone in the sky with little special markers on it, which is pretty unusual, then you probably lose this protest every time. And not because anybody's trying to cheat you, but because, you know, nobody really believes it. Second thought is this 3 boat lane zone is actually kind of shorter than you think it is. Like everybody calls for room way ahead of time, which is good, especially since you have to establish things ahead of time. The rules say the onus is on the person that gained overlap. So if you have an overlap, you say, I have an overlap, and somebody will say, we're still 10 boat lanes out. And you say, I'm just establishing it. And that's a really important conversation to have. But I think there's a bunch of things Jack could have done here. He was pretty far ahead. And if Jack could have made it really clear, if he had just sunk really low right here, he had squared way back, gone a little bit slow, got well into the 3 boat lane zone, turned around, told everybody behind him, no room, I'm at the 3 boat lane zone. You know, put your hand down, your stern and all that stuff. Then I think, you know, if he'd started that conversation early and gone lower earlier to make it really clear they were in the zone, Jack had room to give up to do that. You know, he was enough ahead that he could have easily done that to ensure that he had the 3 boat lane zone and established the overlap. So anyway, that's our 45-minute Jdaze debrief. Happy to go back and look at any of these, and happy to open this up to a little discussion. So I think we can unmute everybody, right? You're as host, you can do that. And were there any comments or questions, Roy?
No, none.
Okay. All right, so you're welcome to unmute yourself and we can have any discussion you want, or as we kind of, the rules of our happy hour post debrief discussion are you're allowed to ask any question you want, but you have to have a cocktail in your hand or a drink of your choice in hand. So.
Yeah, Mike, we're stopped for driving, so no cocktails for us.
Okay.